Hawkins Club. That's right. Stand collectively as a community to demand just that.
All right, so they were on fire. All right, so my time is up. So what we are asking now, where are we now? We want people to help us to take action to get the negotiated ordinance that we had negotiated with City Council and for those 3.5 months in 2018 to be what is the legislation that is going to be passed. So we are asking people to please come and support us at Speak to Council on May 21st. There's more information on the table on how you sign up, etc. We're asking that people will give their contact information so that we can keep you up to date on what's going on and have you come out and have us support us whenever we're doing our public actions. We're asking for people to share our post on your social media networks, tell your friends. We're asking people to call City Council, call your council people, tell them to support the PAB now. And I'm saving the best for last because we need money. We can't do this. We can't do it without money, all right? We all know that, so we need money not just for us, not to look good and all that kind of stuff. We need money for legal support, we need money for media, we need money to keep funding just for papers or making our signs when we're standing out in front of City Hall. We need help with supplies, so that's why we're asking for money. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you support the PAB. Okay, can I do one more thing? I was leaving it for her, but she just passed it over to me, so I'm gonna take about 1 minute of her time. Can I do that? Okay, all right. So, on Thursday, May 2nd, we're gonna be having a press conference at 5 o'clock on the steps of City Hall. And then after that, from 5 o'clock from 6 o'clock on Thursday until 6 o'clock on Friday, we're gonna be doing a 24-hour visual. And we're doing that to honor the victims of police brutality and excessive force. So if anyone wants to sign up to take we're doing shifts for that. It's going to be 24 hours. There are going to be activities for the 24 hours. If anyone wants to sign up to participate, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. You can take a shift. If you want to come and just support to bring people food, if you want to come and pray with us, that will take everything we can get at this particular point. We are really trying to get City Council to go back to the original legislation that we negotiated. Thank you again.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? No? No? How about now? Better?
Yes.
Okay, my audio-visual presentation will happen in your mind. Much easier that way. No clickers, no computers. So if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If you don't want to close your eyes, just look down. And imagine that you're in a hallway, and you're going to get in an elevator. The elevator doors open, and you walk in. The doors close behind you with an alarming clang. You are in an isolation cell. You are in solitary confinement. In this elevator is a hard bed with a thin mattress that doesn't cushion the hard bed underneath at all. An open toilet, a sink, and no window. The lights are on, but they flicker and they go out, and you are now in total darkness. It's completely silent. It's silent for a long time. And after a while, you begin to hear sounds around you in the other parts of the special housing unit, or SHU. screaming, banging, agonizing cries, shouts from the guards to shut up. You have no idea what time it is. It's pitch dark in your cell. And you weren't standing by the little slot in your door, so you didn't get your evening meal. You didn't get anything. You don't have a cup. You don't have a book. You don't have a pad of paper or a pencil, and it's dark anyway. You are in solitary confinement. You are there for many days. You wonder, what did you do to get into this situation? Were you chewing gum at the wrong time? Did you slam the basketball through the hoop? Did you not follow an order quickly enough? What did you do to become one of the 80,000 people since 2011 who have been in solitary confinement? Some for days, some for weeks, some for months, some for decades. Decades. Years of your life, confined in a small, tiny room the size of an elevator, 22 to 23 hours a day, with no human contact, with no opportunity to exercise, socialize, keep up with your news, get news from your family and friends, have visits. Total isolation. So you can come out of the elevator of your mind now. What was that like to imagine? Anybody? Devastating? Terrifying? So imagine that you're in this situation and you are, let's say, you're depressed. You're in prison, you're depressed. How do you think you come out of an experience like that? Not far worse than when you went in. So what I'm advocating for tonight, among all the things that have been mentioned, which I also agree with, is legislation called HALT, Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Confinement, Solitary Confinement. So I'd like to give you a few facts and figures. First of all, the legislation itself. It is Assembly Bill, this is the New York State, Assembly Bill 2500 and Senate Bill 1623. If you want to write to your representatives, you can cite that bill. It has passed in the Assembly. It's still waiting to be further debated, further amended, and hopefully brought out onto the floor of the Senate and passed, when it would then need to be signed by the governor into law. So the key points of solitary confinement are, first of all, if you don't remember anything else about this, remember this: solitary confinement is torture. According to the United Nations, to be in solitary confinement for more than 15 consecutive days is against humane treatment of human beings. Has anyone here been to a state maximum security prison? Have you visited? So you know that the conditions of life in our Seneca Park Zoo are nicer than our prison system. And, you know, we have this idea that prison is punishment, right? That you did the crime, you do the time, it's not supposed to be nice. Unless you happen to be a white-collar, white crime person, and then you go to a much more comfortable facility. I had the opportunity many years ago to visit Great Meadow which is way up north of Albany. It is a New York State maximum security facility, and several of us were walked through this prison, down the corridor where there were people in cages with no barrier between them and us, no visual barrier. They had doors with bars on them, but you could see them. I looked at my shoes. I was so ashamed that I was in that situation, seeing people so degraded, so exposed. I'd like to point out that as a young legislative assistant, I was intimidated by the guards who were deliberately going through our wallets, going through our purses, saying, this is where we find the roaches, you know, in your wallet, as a visitor, as a tour person, they would be happy to lock us up too. So, and not to go into a lot of detail about that, but many of us, I only saw 2 hands go up for anybody who's actually encountered the prison system in person. Maybe more people have seen our local jail, our county jail. But most of us who don't have a loved one incarcerated, we don't encounter the system. It's hidden. It's a huge business. Okay, but back to solitary. The HALT legislation does not pretend that we don't need to isolate some people some of the time. What we're saying is more than 15 days in a row is inhumane. Human beings are social beings. We need human contact. Isolating someone in a small, uncomfortable, cold, I forgot to mention cold. Maybe you heard on the news that at Rikers Island, it was freezing, the windows were open. I understand this is done at times on purpose, just to make people more uncomfortable. And maybe they're in there with a thin t-shirt and worn out pants, and a thin blanket. So, I want you to remember, solitary confinement is torture. Now, in preparing a little bit for tonight, I came across a little piece of information about how solitary confinement was actually discontinued in this country in 1890, because A, it was considered to, and this is a good long time ago, over 100 years ago now, it was considered to contribute to mental deterioration and to not have any rehabilitative effect. So it was largely discontinued until when? When do you think? When do you think it came back? 1980s, 1990s, with the initiation of what? The war on drugs. What is the war on drugs a euphemism for? So we can't talk about solitary confinement without talking also about mass incarceration. I heard Dr. Willis use that awful term, the school to prison pipeline. What a horrifying thing. What a horrifying idea that we would have to have a phrase like that for our youth. But I used to work in juvenile secure detention, which is jail for kids, 10 to 16 at the time. And it was the result of the jail to prison, the school to prison pipeline. And I'm here to tell you that most of those youth were black. Most of them were male. By the time I left, 1/4 of the youth in that facility were female. But they absorbed way more of the time and attention of staff because they were a lot more impaired. But that's a sidelight again, but we have to think about all of these things: mass incarceration, institutional racism, and solitary confinement. And the ideas that we have about punishment and how people, if they somehow get into the correctional system, deserve to be punished. And we know that we are incarcerating now, as Dr. Willis pointed out, 25% of the world's incarcerated population. So that includes places like Turkey, where you don't want to go to prison, right? But you don't want to go to prison in this country either. So, a few more facts. Most people who go into solitary confinement, if they aren't already anxious, depressed, paranoid, or hallucinating, will be by the time they come out. And I want you to remember that almost everyone who goes to prison will one day return to the community. And they will return damaged, in pain, and unable to cope with daily life. The definition of solitary confinement is isolation in a closed cell, 22 to 24 hours a day, no human contact or very little human contact, and for an extended time. Since 1980, which most of us were around in 1980, incarceration rates have quadrupled. Research indicates that solitary confinement causes only harm. So the HALT legislation is not saying we shouldn't sometimes separate people. We need to do that sometimes. But what we need to do also is have humane alternatives that allow people to have rehabilitation, have services, get mental health care, if that's what they need. If you are upset in the prison population, which many people are, you need help and care. And in our current prison system, I'm just talking about New York State, we have less and less and less of those services for people, and more and more and more punishment. We also want to ensure that vulnerable people, such as pregnant women, youth, and people with mental and physical disability do not experience longer than 15 days in solitary confinement. I just purchased a book from Amazon. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. It's called Solitary. And it is the story of a man who was in solitary confinement for 40 years. Think about that, 40 years. So to conclude, I don't have handouts because I wanted to spare the paper that would just get wasted, but if you'd like to know more, please sign into nyciac.org. For more information, they have information sheets, and you can learn a lot about solitary confinement, and NAACP has a lot of information about mass incarceration. So I encourage you to do that research. Contact your local and state representatives to support the HALT Act. It's very near being passed. We're very hopeful that in this day and age, and in New York State, we can do something more humane than what we now do with human beings, which is below the level of our city zoo. So thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I will probably be the quickest presenter tonight. First, thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you all tonight. I count it a privilege to be on a panel next to all of these amazing workers and activists. So what I'm going to talk about, while we talk about the school to prison pipeline and we talk about HALT and police accountability, I'd like to give a little glimmer of hope and talk about a small victory that we won, not really small, which is actually an amazing victory that we won with pretrial legislation. And then give kind of a path forward what to do next as far as implementation in Monroe County, Buffalo, and Syracuse. So first, if we talk about numbers, I as well will not have a clicker or a PowerPoint, so my presentation will also be in your minds and hopefully in your hearts. We've heard a lot of numbers tonight. We talked about the fact that 25% of people incarcerated in the world, 25% of that number is in the United States. Between 1.6 million and 1.9 million of the people that are incarcerated are African American people, and that number only counts the people who are in state and federal prisons. So it is not even counting people who are in jail or doing time in county jails across the nation. At the heart of my work is racial justice work. I think that all of these issues are interconnected, and we can't talk about criminal justice reform or mass incarceration without talking about racial justice issues. So that is why I got into this work. I wanted to dismantle white supremacy and systematic racism, and this was a place to start for me. So I've been with Just Leadership USA for almost a year and a half now. We're on the Free New York campaign, where we've been working on bail reform, speedy trial reform, and discovery reform. They've been working on that for about 5 years, and organizations across the state have been working on it. So the organizations in New York City, such as the Bronx Defenders, NYCLU, Syracuse, all of the ACLU there, Black Love Resist in the Rust in Buffalo, and then all of our amazing organizations here as well. Enough is Enough, Action Together Rochester, Surge, et cetera, et cetera. So the lift that this has been heavy, but the victory that we've gotten so far has been amazing, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. Give you a little bit about what it means. I will say up front that I don't have all of the answers, but I'm committed to community and building out those questions and finding the answers together for the questions I don't have answers to. So when we talk about discovery, so basically, New York State went from being one of the worst states in discovery laws to, I'm not going to say overnight, but over 4 years, having one of the best discovery laws that we will now see enacted in January of 2020. When we talk about discovery, what we're talking about is an open file discovery bill, meaning everything that the prosecution possesses has to be turned over within 15 days of first appearance or at first appearance. So far, what we've had in the past, or currently right now, hopefully people are changing, is that defenders usually aren't given discovery until the day before trial. That doesn't give folks enough time in order to present a viable case for their clients. So over the last 4 years, we've really been fighting and asking that the prosecution, DAs across the state, turn over all information, all evidence that they have at first appearance or within 15 days. Some of the opposition that we found is that a lot of prosecutors were saying that puts our witnesses in danger, right? And if we're honest, at some point it does. So what was done was they put a clause in the legislation to say, if a prosecutor feels like the evidence that they have puts a witness in danger and they don't want to turn it over, what they have to do is go to the judge who's over that case, present their concern to the judge, and then the judge rules if they have to turn over that evidence or not. So we're really excited about that. We thought that was fair, and that will go in act in 2020. What we're gonna start asking judges and prosecutors to do now is to start acting on the discovery that's going to be released in January 2020 now. So that it's just not all done at the same time in one big rush. We're asking folks to implement it now. Over the next coming months, we'll be sitting down with the DA's office, with local judges, asking that this legislation be put into place now. When we talk about speedy trial, so I will say that upstate speedy trial is not really as big of a deal as it is downstate, but because this is statewide work, when one loses, we all lose. So when one wins, we all win. So we fight together. We always like to use Kalief Browder as an example of speedy trial. I don't know if you all know who Kalief Browder was, but he was a 16-year-old African-American kid walking home from school one day and was arrested on a robbery charge. He was accused of snatching someone's book bag off of their person. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if that's armed robbery in a second, but it was a felony. It was a felony robbery charge that he was accused with. He sat in jail for 3 years. 2 of those years he sat in solitary confinement as a 16-year-old kid. He did not do it. He was offered a plea deal several times, and each time he denied it because he didn't do it. His family couldn't afford to bail him out, so he sat in Rikers Island for 3 years. And then one day they just said, oh, we forgot about him, let him go. During that 3 years, he was physically assaulted, he was raped, and he sat in solitary confinement for 3 years. He got out of jail and ended up committing suicide. A lot of things that we miss is we don't talk about the trauma that mass incarceration causes, and that's where a loophole is in the system. But not just because of that, but his brother started an organization in New York City called Catal, where we sat down with them and really wrote out speedy trial legislation, and we actually got it. So what Speedy Trial does, one of the things that it does is prosecutors can no longer declare readiness at arraignment. What we see happening is that at arraignment, prosecutors declare readiness and it starts the clock over again for people to be prosecuted. So in the legislation that's coming in 2020, prosecutors can no longer declare readiness at trial. And also for New York City specifically, this legislation prevents pretrial diversion. Pretrial conversion. Also, we're excited about this legislation because in New York City, sitting on Rikers Island, it can take a year and a half just to be arraigned. Like here, we don't see that. You get arraigned the next morning. In New York City, it can be a year and a half before you even get arraigned because their policing policies is so corrupt and people are arrested at alarming rates for the smallest crimes. So yeah, again, we're really excited about that. That's very much a downstate problem, but we're still excited about it as a win. And then last but not least, bail reform. We've been fighting for bail reform forever. What we ask for in bail reform is that all misdemeanor crimes, cash bail be eliminated. What we see is that people literally are sitting in jail, not because they've been convicted of a crime, but because they just cannot afford to get out. And whether you are sitting in jail for a week or 2 days or 3 days because you can't afford to pay, that is enough time to lose your job, to lose your apartment, to lose your children, et cetera, et cetera. So we ask that money bail be eliminated for all misdemeanor crimes as well as 2 felony crimes. I do want to say, while this is a victory, we also know that overcharging is a thing, especially in Monroe County. So you can be arrested and be charged with a crime that you didn't commit just to be coerced into a plea deal. So while we are excited that we got bail reform, we realize that this reform that we got still leaves a lot of people out. So I want to make it very clear that we're not giving up. We're still going to Albany. We're still advocating. We're still going to lobby days, asking that money bail be eliminated altogether. When it comes to money bail, one of the things that we're worried about is because people will no longer have money bail for misdemeanor crimes, we're worried about folks being overcharged when arrested. Here in New York State, here in Monroe County, police also have the ability to charge you with a crime, as well as the DA. We've been sitting down with some of our local officials asking that when we put in FOIA requests, we want to start tracking the policing in Monroe County a little bit more closely to see what it looks like over time. We already know that urban neighborhoods are over-policed at alarming rates. But again, folks, we don't need numbers because we're Black and we know what it is, but other people need numbers, right? So we've been sitting down and we've been asking that when we do these FOIA requests, that we don't run into brick walls. So one of the implementation strategies for bail reform in Monroe County is that we FOIA request at alarming rates so that we can get real live data that we can use for folks to be held accountable. Again, all of these issues are interconnected. When I think about fighting for criminal justice reform and I think about the state of our school, I feel like I'm fighting for the kids in our current school system who are going to be coming through the criminal justice system. So all of these issues are interconnected. I'm really excited to get into conversation, answer some of your questions, so we can build this out together and see what reform looks like in Monroe County. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Great segue. As this is our opportunity to ask questions, just kind of housekeeping. We have to be totally out of the facility by 9 p.m., so we will take some questions in just about a quarter to. So I would ask you, if you have a question, to raise your hand. Jen, are you here? Jen? Or Judy, are you going to pass the mic? Okay, very good. So does anyone have a question to begin? Yes, right up front.
Well, I didn't hear the alternatives to the part. I thought we were going to hear some alternatives.
And is that for Ashley?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Ashley. All right, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
The
Kathleen?
question was, what are the alternatives to solitary confinement? And I apologize, I ran out of time, the 3-minute sign came up. But there are alternatives. I did refer to rehabilitation, to putting in services, to creating environments that are more humane than just confining people to tiny rooms for 22 to 24 hours a day. I have some material here. It's not helping me at the moment. So what I'd like to say is that the alternatives to solitary are really programming. So if a person is acting out in the population and they need to be separated from the general population, that is usually because there are unmet needs involved. So they have a mental health problem that's not being treated. We do know that people in prison don't have access to the kind of mental health care that we have in free society. And even the access there is not that great. So I'll give you a little anecdote from my own life. As I said in my introduction, I'm a retired social worker. One of my friends is a psychiatrist, and she was providing services in one of the jails in the metropolitan area. And she met with her client and said, "Are you taking your medication?" And the client said, "When I can catch it." She said, "When you can catch it?" And the client said, "Well, the guard throws the medication down the hall, and whoever catches it gets to take it." That's not an acceptable standard of mental health care in any setting whatsoever. So we're talking about putting in the supports that will help people come back into the community functioning, less damaged than they went in before. So every jail has a solitary confinement setup of some kind. But to try to look at how do we increase socialization rather than depriving people of socialization? How do we teach them? Do therapy. My role at the Children's Center was the counselor. So I would see kids and I would work on their issues, I would try anyway, and try to help them prepare to go back home, if that's what they were doing, to stay out of trouble, if they had the opportunity, or to deal with what they were facing ahead if they had to go to places. But those services are not always available to people who are placed in solitary. So really what we need to do is move out of our 18th century ideas about what an incarcerated person should face, punishment, and look at habilitation, rehabilitation, support. I'm not talking about country club services. I'm talking about basic human approaches to helping people who are suffering. Does that help?
If there's any more, maybe at the end, if you would like to have another conversation, that would be great. Another question in the back.
Hi, this is for whoever wants to take it. I'm just curious if you think that the Raise the Age initiative in New York State has or will help the mass incarceration numbers?
Who would like to take that? Repeat the question also.
The question was, do we believe that the Raise the Age new law that was put in place October 17th, I believe, is going to have an impact on mass incarceration numbers overall? So quite frankly, no. Right, so Rochester, New York State is the second to last state in the union, outside of Utah, to even adopt this. Nowhere else in the country do they accept 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds as adults, right? And so even though we root ourselves in being so progressive here, East Coast, New York State, when it comes to these types of policies that was extremely well articulated, these are draconian practices, right? And we know the mind states of the individuals when they put these systems into place and how they valued or devalued human life overall. And so that's just kind of the short.
Thank you, right back there too, I believe, and then we'll go over on this side.
First, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having this incredible panel. You were all so riveting and informative. I have two questions. One is for Dr. Willis, and one is for Pastor Wilson. For Dr. Willis, I was wondering if how you feel about the University of Rochester relationship with Eastview, is it?
East High School?
East High School. On the news the other day, it just seemed like it was a tremendous success, and I was just wondering how you feel about it, and if you feel that it could be an answer for the rest of the school district.
So I'm going to unpack that in kind of the three stages you asked. One, I am a proponent of collective consciousness, and I believe that our community partners, inclusive of our universities, have a role to play in being a support for our school district. Do I think that they're the only entity or the means by which our district is going to pivot? Not in the absence of being in concert with other agencies, right? And so I think that this is one model that we are seeing some outcome-based results, but this has also been a process of 4 years almost now, going into its 5th year, that we're just now getting to see what we hope is a change in trajectory, right, when it comes to outcome-based assessment. So I think the one thing that's really, really good for the nature of how this program works is East High used to have a stigma of being someplace that was difficult or challenging, and now it has the stigma of being an educational center where you can really get work done and have some attachment to programs. And I think that there's not enough focus that's put into what partnerships with community members, universities specifically, can have on the overall vision of what it is. East High, when I was growing up, came with a fear-based, people were scared to go to East. It doesn't hold that same that same value in the community. And I think that speaks to the work of Superintendent Nelms, the model that he's trying to move forward, the way that his curriculum is aligned both horizontally across grade level and vertically K through 12. I think that they do a good job over there.
Thank you. Over here?
She had an addendum question.
For Pastor Willis, is that right? Wilson. Sorry. You didn't really talk very much that I could hear about the objections to having someone from law enforcement on the accountability board. And it's been a question in my mind only because it would seem like to get that perspective and knowledge might be helpful to the board. And then my other question for you
I'm
is...
sorry, I'm going to limit you to that just because we've got several more to go. So and then we can finish that if there's still, I'll come back to you.
Well, I think I'm going to answer it from the end because the objection to having law enforcement on the board, number one, would be the influence. And we don't want board members who don't have law enforcement background to think that they would need to always look to the person that would have that type of experience and background on the board. We wanted to not have the influence, and it would also not make the board independent. So if we bring someone in that has a law enforcement or is a part of RPD, that takes away one of the pillars that we have been fighting and negotiating for. But what it will happen is if there is no law enforcement, it doesn't mean that we still can't get the experience that we would be asking for, because the board members will have to be trained in the RPD's policy, practices, and procedures and any relevant local, state, and federal laws. We will also, when an officer comes up and they have to go through the process, that Rochester Police Department officer is going to bring that experience with him. He's going to, when he is testifying, when he's submitting information, we will be able to get that information from an officer that's also going through the system. We will get the information also that we need, that someone with law enforcement from the professional standards section, from the internal affairs. So it's not as though we would be totally absent of getting that kind of information. We would be consulting. So it wouldn't be lacking, but the main reason is we don't want to, it would take away one of the 5 pillars that we negotiated for the board to be totally independent from the Rochester Police Department.
Thank you so much. Over here. In the back.
I have I have a comment.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, I have a comment. There was recently something on television where a prison system somewhere in the United States, and I don't remember whether it was on 60 Minutes or what, and I don't remember where the prison was, but the officers in the prison decided that they were going to treat the prisoners or the inmates like human beings. And they would have circles and they'd have discussions and so forth. And what they found out is that it was not a revolving door situation. Once the people were rehabilitated, they were released back out on the street, never to return, or if they did return, they returned to visit. But now I have a question for Dr. Willis. The prison system in this country is a big business. In fact, in a number of locations, they're run by private industry.
Almost 50% now in the United States.
My question is, what would happen if we got to a situation similar to what I was just describing, and these prisons started closing down? What happens to the people who are working there and the surrounding community?
Well, there's a couple of things going on. Number one, we want restorative practices embedded in how it is that we think critically about populations of people that we know are going to be put back into our communities, right? The type of services that we want them to have. What it would do to our communities if there weren't any people, hopefully it makes them better communities because people are acting more civil, right? And I think that if you created a town that was predicated on an unjust system or inequitable system of mass incarceration, then when individuals are performing the way that they should within the context of our rules, how we govern, right, then those places should be eradicated. You should find some new business. It's really just that simple. It shouldn't be like that anyway. Right now, taxpayers and privatization of prison companies have to pay the tax dollars for every bed that's not full. Right? So now you're offsetting that in a private institute with public tax dollars that's still going to ensure that that law enforcement is going to look for my little cousin or my little brother or my niece or any one of these young chitterlings that I love so much from here to Anchorage, Alaska, right? So if you're in our system, we know that mass incarceration is in fact a broken business model, right? And it's fish in a barrel. And where does law enforcement police? They police within the